I've been dealing with body dysmorphia for around 3 years now. It started as nothing greater than the average comment giving me a bad day, but it grew inside of me over time into an immeasurable hatred for the body I lived in. School kids would call me names like Fatty McPhee, Burger Boy, Hippo, sometimes even just "you're fat." To them, it was a mere joke, a quick laugh before lesson. The neighbors used to despise me. As per them, I wasn't setting the right example for their kids and the society as a whole. It should have never even started. I just wish they would take it back. Even an apology would have stopped the vines inside my soul from growing. Eventually, it became too late for anyone to take it back, and that was when it truly started. Every night in front of the mirror, I would undress, ready to take a shower. A quick glance in the mirror showed me my body that I was not happy with. I wish I could lose weight, but there was simply no motivation in me to exercise. I was convinced that I would never feel comfortable with myself again. I wanted out. One night while walking into the bedroom with a nervous shiver, I happened to glance at myself in the mirror accidentally. Usually, I would see myself and swiftly shivel my head away. This time, however, it was different. As I stared into the mirror, a pair of eyes that were not my own stared back, a sinister grin widening as I continued to look. The figure in the mirror suddenly opened its mouth as to speak. Then, I heard a voice whisper next to me, "Pop the pills." Suddenly, the figure vanished, and I was left shuddering in fear at what that thing was. It seemed my own body in the mirror spoke to me, my real self not matching that of my reflection. It petrified me as I ran out of the bathroom into my bed. I decided I would shower tomorrow in my parents' bathroom. Mine was no longer safe. The next morning arose abruptly as I strained my eyes to stay open, without really feeling the effects of yesterday hitting me as much as they should have. That was until I noticed a small box lying on my bedside table. "Weight loss pills" was inscribed on the front. My mind relapsed into shock. How could they just appear? My mom and dad weren't even aware of my existence, let alone buying me weight loss pills. Logically, they shouldn't be there, and any other reasonable being would most certainly have thrown them away. But the words seemed too enticing to ignore, so I gave in and took my first one the very same morning. After gulping a few down into my gullet, I stumbled towards the bathroom, still drowsy from sleep, when the whisper rang out again. "Come closer." It beckoned me to the bathroom, and for some foul reason, not of my own mind, I complied. I scampered over to the bathroom with haste, locking the door behind me as I entered its evil grasp. There it was again, but it wasn't me. A fragmented image of the body I had, mixed with the demonic face of another. It spoke once more, in a low, almost disgruntled tone. "Take more," it growled. "The pills shall hide your fears. They are your comfort." The figure then vanished, and once again, I was looking unhappily at my body that I wished wasn't mine, with a single stream of tears flowing down my cheek. I was so mortified I couldn't move. The tears that poured from my eyes were filled with despair. Not being able to fathom the reality that surrounded me, I was left feeling isolated and at the mercy of whatever demon had taken over my conscience. Days passed by, and I got more visions of that creature, telling me to increase the dose. I finished off the first box of 20 in under a week. I thought that by doing what it said, I would escape. It wasn't real. I knew that. At least until a fresh box appeared in the morning after. The pills themselves drastically decreased my energy levels. I felt on the verge of succumbing to fatigue at all times of the day, never seeming to catch a break from this agonizing nightmare. Once again, I wanted out. But this time, I wanted to escape this vicious cycle of seeing that evil person in the mirror. And these pills. These damned pills. But what petrified me to my very core was the fact that the pills were working. My weight started declining, and in some strange sense, I felt happier. I was able to go outdoors again, only with the negative of being drained, but the poisonous comments stopped. Some who had once been the core of the problem now applauded me at the sudden change of my appearance. Many were shocked to see such a drastic change occur in such a short period of time, but nonetheless, I felt enjoyment bursting through my veins. And then, it all collapsed. Such vast amounts of weight loss were evidently extremely dangerous for my health, both physically and mentally. The figure in the mirror began transforming. In the beginning, it was nothing more than my face that changed, but now it seemed to take control over my entire body, feeding at me like some vile parasite that refused to leave me. I was trapped. The final night I saw it, it left me haunting words that I would never be able to forget. Even to this day, I still deal with the shame surrounding my body. It continues to ravage my mind. It was raining thunderbolts outside my house that evening. I had been summoned once more to the bathroom, where that same figure awaited me. The figure had now complete control over my vision, for what stared back at me was my mom. Her hand seemed to grave my shoulder, and she came down close to my reflection's face, then whispered, "I have you, hun." Immediately, I was decimated with the realization that there was no figure. It was my mom, hugging me now from behind. Her tears drained down upon my shoulder, and I too started crying. It had been her all along. She had seen me distressed with my own mind and tried to fix things with a pill. But each night, she supposedly saw me enter the bathroom with a solemn face that wasn't mine. She worried for me every night. She cried for me every day. She just wanted to help me, but she didn't understand how to talk to me about it. Until finally, she came through. Me and my mom have been inseparable since that day. I still struggle with body dysmorphia, but my mom takes away incredible volumes of the agony that comes with it. I feel safe knowing that she's with me. But as for the final night in the bathroom, the words that I have not yet told you came from a dark shadow lurking in the corner. "I will find you again," it spoke in a raspy voice. "And forever, I shall be wary. Whatever that thing may be, I don't want it to return." Dame Maggie's smile was infectious. I caught a grin from watching her stand in front of the mirror, twirling this way and that as she assessed her new frame. The glee caught me by surprise, and I sensed my heart snap against the muscly confines of my chest. I was doing the right thing, I thought to myself, as I watched a corrupt concern creep up the side of her face and finally settled. Her mood changed so easily. "The pills have worked so much magic on me, Christian," she said. Her new spindling frame was an intoxicating sight that came and went fleetingly. I could sense her yearning for her old body. I swallowed awkwardly and wiped the back of my hands over my face to cleanse the sweat that had begun to bead around my brow. She turned back to the mirror, and my mind returned to my concern. It had only been a few days, and it had worked like magic. I was too excited. I felt my fingers quiver from watching her. "Look at me, Christian. I've lost 100 pounds in 13 days. I'm as lean as those models that walk on a fashion runway. I bet I wouldn't be recognized by anybody right now." She continued to speak as I sensed her tone fall lower, more ruthful. "They would love you better," I muttered. "Hmm?" She heaved and looked back at the mirror. I watched her from where I sat, and simple thoughts flooded my mind. The concentration was averted to why I had done what I was doing. Dame Maggie was richer than anyone around. Hers was the type of wealth that was only heard of and whom almost none had seen. It was a life of possibilities and grandeur, which she had access above anyone else, and I had more access than anyone else in her life. It was for a good reason, but she had always maintained. That's why I call her Dame Maggie. It had been difficult at first, and I had spiraled off her course, but my purpose in the past had catapulted from a whoring young man to wealthy woman who could give me what I desired to something loftier. I was always bound to an insecure fat woman, and now I was possibly the heir of wealth so great it made my head spin to think that she almost never showed me the entirety of it. Standing before me in the mirror still was not Fat Dame Maggie, whose fortune spread across the continents. It was indeed a woman so thin and altered. "You know, Christian, I feel so dizzy sometimes when I take those pills. Super helpful, but I must say," she called, distracting me from my line of thought. I saw the worry on her face, etched as a noticeable scowl. Perhaps she did too, because she immediately placed her hands under her eyes and toyed with the rolls of fat under her eyes. I brimmed with impatience. I couldn't wait for the weight loss pills to do its job. The desire scoured through my very fiber of being like ravaging electricity. I could not afford to lose now, I thought to myself as I stood from her bed and then got onto my feet. I contracted my muscles and released it playfully, and her eyes lit up from worry to concern. She was always like that. I had learned to deal with it. She weighted my approach, frail as she was. I saw the effect of the weight loss pills on her skinny frame and why she had begun to worry. "I had a terrible dream, Christian. I think I should stop taking the pills," she muttered suddenly, seizing me by surprise. I stopped in my tracks briefly and stole a furtive look at her hands, which came up by her side. She also glanced at it, and they were drying up. It would all go to waste. All my effort and time. I couldn't afford it. "It's only been a few days," I urged her. Her eyes went to the counter by the mirror, and my eyes followed, and there it was, another glass of water and the pill. She had always wanted to be thin. She had her desires, but she had always been fat. And when she asked for my help, it was my opportunity. Time had not proven itself as an ally until that moment. Now, her hesitation threatened to snatch it from me. I exhaled deeply and stared into her eyes. I reached my hands over and she craned her neck to the rest of the side of her face on my open palm. I stroked the other side of her face, pulling lightly on her hair and caressing her emaciated cheeks as her eyes fluttered. "You know, ever since I had you, I've always feared that you would be like me," she murmured, with her eyes still shut. I watched her quietly, even though I had heard this story over 100 times. She was always the fat girl from the day she was born, and it had always affected her self-esteem so greatly that not even wealth and power could have been enough from betraying her vulnerability. I was nothing like her. In fact, I had gone after the same things that had intimidated her in life when she was younger, and I had lived my life as recklessly as I could. I had gone after her friends and betted them for money. They had all told me the same thing. Dame Maggie was a strange woman, and I already knew that. "You should take your pill for the evening, and I suppose you should stop," I said to her, and her eyes slowly came open. She nodded her head feebly, and I moved my hand from supporting her head. I went straight for the glass and pill. I stood before it, sensing she waited behind me, and I decided that it was best not to wait it out. I slipped the lethal portion from my pants and replaced the slower killer. I handed the pill and the water to her. She took it with a smile on her face and swallowed. My mind raced ahead of time, and I imagined her gasping to death on the floor as I ran to the door to fetch someone who could help. An autopsy would be useless, as a cardiac arrest would be the most they would suspect. She had become lean too quickly, they would say, and I would be rich. "You know, I had always thought you'd never do it," she said, still grinning as she stared at me and handed me the glass. "What?" I quizzed in confusion. "I am your mother, Christian. I know you. This was all my design. I could not die with the guilt that I left you, to this sick world, to yourself, so I had you do it. Anyway, I drank the pill. I'm sick of this world already," she sighed. "What are you talking about?" I asked, sweaty with confusion, as the terror of confusion made me hot from within. "Oh, I would just lay on the bed and be dead in 10 minutes. Don't call the cops until you're certain I'm dead, and don't touch anything else," she said as she moved to the bed to lay on it, with the most stiff expression and resignation I had ever seen her wear. There I was as she spoke and left me, stunned. I watched in dread as my mother surrendered to death, and it crippled me to think that she knew. It was 10 minutes, and just like that, just like she said, when the breeze had not blown and the world stood still around me, she knew, and it would haunt me forever. I walked down the narrow and empty street as I hummed to myself quietly. It was a dark evening. The streetlights weren't on yet, but my house wasn't too far, so I decided to walk. I tried not to acknowledge the looming feeling over my shoulder, and I turned on my phone flash. I decided against looking behind me and picked up the pace, now more determined than ever to get home. "Doll." I heard a voice call behind me, and I froze in my tracks. My blood ran cold. He found me. I suddenly looked and whipped my head back, but didn't see anyone, although the dreadful feeling had already settled in me. I continued my journey home, now running as fast as I could. I quickly unlocked my front door and went inside, shut it, locking it behind me. My breath came out in short, heavy pants, and I struggled to even out my breathing. I filled up a cup of water and drank it, all while my beating heart subsided. I shook my head and had to clear my thoughts. It couldn't possibly be him. He couldn't have found me. I must have been hearing things. I tried to convince myself that it was all a figment of my imagination, till my eyes caught something I'm sure wasn't there previously. I slowly moved towards my sturdy table, my eyes fixed on a strange object. A bottle of pills. I read the note attached to the bottle of pills left on my table. "Doll, I see you've been slacking on your medication. You've been looking quite pudgy lately. Be a good doll and take these for me till I return. 4 in the morning, 4 at night. I'm sure you remember what happens if you're a bad doll." My heart was racing by the time I finished reading. Oh, no. It can't be. I ripped the note apart and threw the bottle of weight loss pills to the ground. I screamed, tears filling my eyes. How did he find me? How did he get in? I sobbed and slid my back against the wall till I hit the floor. It had been a week since then. I refused to leave my house for fear that he'd take me. I couldn't sleep. I'd have nightmares of him coming back and shoving the pills down my throat. I'd even sometimes feel him lurk around the dark corners of the house. I laid on my bed and stared at the bottle of weight loss pills that now sat on my bedside table. I had placed them back there. Who knew that psycho monster was monitoring my every move? Perhaps through a hidden camera in my room? This was pathetic. My condition was pathetic. I had to do something, I thought to myself. I got up and reached for it, clenched the bottle of pills tightly in my shaky hands. I went to the bathroom and lifted the toilet seat. With a set mind, I dumped the contents of the bottle into the toilet and flushed. I almost let out a sigh of relief when I heard the rattle of the door handle. He was here. My heart sunk into the pit of my stomach, and I contemplated ending it all right here. But no, I got away from him once, and I could do it again. I ran back to the bedroom and quickly grabbed my phone, sending an emergency text to my boss and informed him to help me out somehow. Over the past few months, he had become my pillar of support. The monster's heavy footsteps echoed through the house, and my body trembled in fear. I sat still like a doll at the edge of my bed, just as he taught me to. My heart beat faster with every footstep, and I looked straight ahead, not daring to look back as he came in. The squeak of the door to my room opening announced his presence, and I kept my face completely emotionless, as he liked. "My pretty doll," he said as he stood beside me. I stayed as still as I could, the pungent smell of alcohol from his breath hitting my nostrils. I nearly gagged as he bent beside me, sniffing my hair, licked the skin of my cheek, letting out a sound of satisfaction. He pet my hair slowly, then gave it a harsh tug, which caused me to let out a hiss I immediately regretted. "I'm sorry I moved." I immediately started begging, the tears falling down my eyes fast. He frowned and shook his head aggressively. "Why is my pretty doll crying? Dolls don't cry." I nodded my head quickly and got back into position, but the tears didn't stop rolling down my cheeks. He yelled at me to stop crying and smacked my face with the back of his hand hard. Due to the massive impact, I fell on the bed. I touched my bottom lip, which was bruised from his knuckle ring, and I winced. "Your face is all fat. You haven't been taking your medication, have you?" He yanked my head up as he spoke and spat in my face. I lied that I finished it. My mind instantly went to the empty pill bottle I left on the bathroom floor. I prayed in my head silently that he wouldn't discover it. "Liar!" he yelled once again and held my face tight in his hands. "Why are you so bad? Dolls aren't bad. You used to be my perfect little doll, and now you're all fat." He pinched and dragged my cheeks and arms while he spoke. He mumbled to himself as he reached into his back pocket and pulled out an identical pill bottle that he had given me earlier. I shook my head vigorously. "No, please, no," I pleaded, but he ignored me and held the back of my head tightly, fisting my hair. He ripped the bottle open with his teeth and poured a handful of the pills into his free hand. I scratched at the hand holding my head and squirmed, trying to free myself from his grasp. I screamed at the top of my lungs, hoping someone, somewhere would hear me and come to help, but he used that as an opportunity to dump the handful of pills into my mouth. He closed my mouth shut and with his hand shook me and attempted to force me to swallow them. I choked and fought with all my might, but he held down on my neck, trying to get me to give in. I began seeing spots in my vision. I was too weak to continue resisting. Just as I was about to give up, my door was busted off its hinges, and policemen flocked into my room. My tormentor was instantly taken off me. I felt my body heave as I coughed and spat out the pills, and a protective arm wrapped around me. "You're okay. Everything's okay. You're safe now," the owner of the arm said. I looked up with blurry eyes and identified him to be my boss. I finally sighed in relief and watched as the police detained him and took him away. He was charged and found guilty of his crimes. That was the final time I saw him. I started my life anew and in a new city without fear of my father ever coming back.
There had been no struggle when my heart ceased to feel fear. There had been no tumult, nor the violent waves of panic I anticipated in those weeks when I was so terrified it paralyzed my limbs. I had awaited the urgency of that final moment so eagerly, constantly adjusting for impact that I would have felt disappointed if I had the capacity to feel anything at all. Instead, I felt a dull release pervading my numb skin as I stared blankly forward into the eyes of the vermin that sought its own survival. The rat inspired a new desperation in me that took long moments to blossom. All this time I had been afraid, but now I wanted to survive. Both my hands had been tied into each other for so long. I struggled to realize myself from the drawn-out slumber. I could now make out the outline borders of the rope on my skin, borders which had eaten into my supple flesh when the ropes had been tightened around my wrist. Even my pale flesh had become tan with stress and fatigue. I could not care about it, even though the thought of how much thinner I looked troubled my mind. I was seated at the table, as was usual for my evening meals, with both my hands tied forward and visible at all times. My eyes were sore from lack of sleep, and the rest of my limbs ached terribly, but I was awake and fascinated by the gray, parched, wild rat that snuck its way around the table only to seat atop it. The pudgy rodent smelt rotten, roiling my stomach, but I had not flinched. I watched it crawl about with a resolute desire for food and keen awareness that it was being watched. Its ears perked and moved about as it crawled over the table. It was at that moment I knew I had lost fear because I had not blinked. The animal rolled over my rope, and he gnawed at it desperately, not realizing the futility of what it was doing. I maintained my silence as it did what it had to.
Aha, here we go. The perfect cocktail for you.
Mrs. Potter, at least who she said she was, returned to the table with a hand grabbing a cup at the base and another clasped over, bearing the weight loss pills. The rat bolted out of sight at once when her voice was heard. I thought it was funny. My aura had become so weak that even quirky praise did not mind trespassing into my presence. My reverie was cut short when Mrs. Potter sat in front of me. It seemed like a lifetime ago since I had first taken those pills. I recalled my first time with such vividness. Every time I held them in my hands and slowed down for a moment's hesitation before her watchful eyes guided my hands with disciplined duty to my mouth. They were odorless and tasteless. Still, I had the feeling that I already had too much of it in my stomach, and now it had begun to make me sick if I was not numb. I saw in her eyes that she was proud of her work on me. I had been fashioned after the desires of her heart, a perfect merchandise for her own vanity. But it was not that simple. The putrid smell around the house bore the truth of the matter. Mrs. Potter indulged in a trade so despicable when she had first told me about it after I had been kidnapped. I had not slept for a week. A flesh trader, she had said with as much apathy as one would say that they cleared their lawn for a few bucks.
Clients don't need no fucking fatzos,
she would say to me. More of a threat than it was a statement. She needed her victims thin. She would say as though it was a simple chore like going for grocery shopping. There were certain people who enjoyed the taste of thin flesh, and she was a supplier. Her modest green eyes were all the home I had known for those few weeks. She needed that little time to turn me into a sad form of my past self. There was little I could do to break myself from her overwhelming presence. Mrs. Potter's knife checked every hesitation. I bore the marks of her cuts on my pale skin, which witnessed those things, and I would often stare at them with my lifeless eyes. She would often hold her knife, a small dagger with a curved edge, under my chin as she spoke. The routine was that I would slip the weight loss pills into my mouth, and if I was good, I got a swig of water to wash it down. If I wasn't, her sharp blade piercing my skin would push me to compliance. On this occasion, I was good, so I got water.
Good girl.
Mrs. Potter said to me as she handed me the cup of water to wash down the nasty sensation of having too many pills in my mouth.
My clients would enjoy you when you're gone. You would be of a better service to humankind after you are dead.
I thought it was funny that she would say that to me, as though she was powerless herself to bring about a different outcome in events. So I smiled.
What's with the humor?
She asked, smirking in mild surprise.
Do you think I'd ever be thin enough?
I asked her with a raspy throat. She reclined in her seat and blinked at me. When she blinked, she winced, and her brows covered her eyes, layering her appearance with a look of malevolence. My heart beat fast, but I knew what I had to do, and I was desperate for it. She punched the table and sighed. My limbs pulsated, and I sensed the sweet taste of nail-biting uneasiness filling her mouth.
You do need a mirror now, don't you? My weight loss pills have never failed me.
Mrs. Potter growled angrily, stirred by her own doubt.
When you are thin enough for my clients, I'll do with your flesh as I please, and I would enjoy every bit of it for what you have just done.
Can I get water to drink? I said to her, the intensity of my heart racing, turning into an unbearable heat that made it difficult to breathe. Adrenaline and passion fueled my muscles.
You would have to drink your piss for teasing me tonight,
she said to me and leaned in. I pulled my hands from the table with all of the strength in my limbs, and the rope broke. My heart thanked the animal as I leaped from where I sat with an agility which my slimmer body now offered. I knocked her over and quickly grabbed the cup from the table. I held it by the rim and whacked Mrs. Potter across the face with relentless blows until she could not resist, laying flat out on the floor. That was my moment of escape after weeks of being kidnapped by the evil Mrs. Potter, and I took it.